For all that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
One sentence was enough to change the temperature inside the monarchy. Prince William did not hedge, soften, or retreat when the moment arrived. With senior figures already braced for tension, the future king delivered words so personal that they instantly became something larger than a family declaration. Catherine is the only woman this crown truly belongs to. And in the silence that followed, everyone understood that this was about far more than affection. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William held his ground as Catherine looked toward him, unsettled by the force of what he had said. The Prince of Wales, the title given to the monarch's direct adult heir, knew every word would be measured against the future he may inherit. Catherine had expected protection. His declaration placed her at the center of a conflict beyond marriage. She stayed composed, yet understood the danger immediately. Charles stared at his son, then slowly lowered the pen in his hand. The king heard more than devotion. He heard a boundary. William was not claiming that authority had legally shifted. The crown remained the institution of monarchy and sovereign power under Charles. But the future king was making a moral argument about what that institution should represent next. That mattered because his words carried the weight of succession and a coming reign. Camilla moved her chair and asked whether he understood what he had just implied. The queen consort, a title used for the wife of a reigning king, did not raise her voice. Her question sharpened the silence. William answered calmly that he understood exactly what he had said. Camilla watched him longer, and Catherine realized the statement had landed as a direct challenge whether he intended it or not. One advisor glanced toward William's papers and recognized a reference to an earlier dispute over Catherine's future ceremonial position. Ceremonial roles are public royal duties tied to state occasions and national symbolism, and this one had apparently become the focus of arguments behind closed doors. That discovery changed the mood. His words had not erupted from sudden anger. He had arrived prepared. Catherine felt the consequences closing in, even as William remained steady. Charles heard a warning about the monarchy he was still leading. Camilla heard a threat to her place within it. The advisors heard the first crack in a dispute that could become impossible to contain. Yet the greatest shock was still ahead, because to understand why William had spoken with such extraordinary force, everyone around that table, and everything each feared losing, had to come into focus. Behind William's declaration stood four people carrying four very different versions of the monarchy. Catherine had spent years learning how to survive its pressure without demanding its spotlight. Camilla had fought through decades of hostility to secure her place beside Charles. And William, caught between husband, son, and future sovereign, had finally reached the point where silence felt more dangerous than confrontation. Catherine understood exactly why the words had landed so heavily. Her importance came from continuity, family symbolism, public duty, and the future she was expected to share beside William, not from any immediate constitutional authority over Camilla. Constitutional authority means the formal powers attached to the sovereign and the legal structure around the crown, and Catherine possessed no power to simply displace the queen consort. Yet symbolism could wound just as deeply as law. Camilla had spent years rebuilding public acceptance, and hearing another woman described as the person the crown truly belongs to struck at everything she had fought to secure. Catherine waited until she and William were alone before admitting what had frightened her. She told the prince that his defense had made her feel less protected, not more, because her name could now become a weapon inside a family already carrying old scars. William listened without interrupting. Then he told her remaining silent had become impossible. He had watched too many quiet disagreements grow sharper, because nobody was willing to draw a line. William pushed his notes toward her and admitted the sentence had been deliberate. The future king had spent much of the previous night rewriting it, searching for words strong enough to make the room understand he was defending more than his wife. He believed the next version of monarchy had to reward service, restraint, and trust rather than private influence. Catherine reached for the page, found the sentence underlined twice, then quietly placed it face down between them. Camilla confronted Charles elsewhere with a question she could no longer avoid. Did the king agree with his son? He did not answer directly. The monarch spoke instead about unity, timing, and the damage a family argument could cause if it escaped palace walls. Camilla heard every word except the one she needed. His hesitation hurt more than outright disagreement, because it told her Charles was torn between defending the woman beside him and protecting the heir who would one day inherit everything he was trying to preserve. Charles acted before the night was over. He ordered that notes from the gathering remain tightly restricted, meaning access would be limited to a very small circle of senior officials. The king now feared more than embarrassment. William had defined a standard for the monarchy's future, and everyone could begin measuring the present household against it. But none of them had yet spoken openly about what caused the rupture. That answer lay several weeks earlier, inside one controlled palace discussion that ended with Catherine walking away and William deciding he would never allow the same thing to happen again. Every royal rupture has a moment people later identify as the true beginning. In this story, it was not William's shocking declaration. It happened weeks earlier, during what was meant to be a controlled discussion about future responsibilities. Catherine entered expecting schedules, precedents, and protocol. She left feeling that something far more personal had been decided around her, and William would remember one sentence from that meeting as the point when restraint began turning into resolve. William had already been taking on greater responsibility beside Catherine, as Charles and Camilla remained at the center of the current reign. Palace advisors were trying to prevent overlap between the two households, because duplicated duties could create confusion over who represented the monarchy at major events. Ceremonial precedents, the formal order deciding where senior royals stand and what roles they perform, might sound administrative, but inside the palace, it carried enormous symbolic weight. Visibility meant continuity. Placement meant trust. Catherine listened as a future state ceremony was discussed, and learned that one prominent role many expected to move naturally toward the Prince and Princess of Wales would remain firmly attached to Camilla's household. The Queen Consort's team framed it as continuity for the current reign, not a rejection of Catherine. But the distinction did little to soften the impact. Years of duty had suddenly been reduced to a question of position. Catherine refused to argue. She closed her folder, thanked everyone calmly, and left without confrontation. William walked beside her afterward and noticed something that unsettled him more than anger could have. She said almost nothing. The prince understood her silence because he had seen how often she absorbed pressure rather than adding to it, and this time, that restraint felt painfully different. William confronted the subject once they were alone. Catherine admitted she felt as though years of service had been turned into a competition she had never asked to enter. She told him not to make the dispute public, and insisted she did not want her role built through conflict with Camilla. He listened, but when she asked him to leave it alone, he gave no promise. William then learned the decision extended beyond a single ceremony. An internal proposal would delay several symbolic responsibilities connected with Catherine's growing position well into the future. The future king began recording his objections in written notes and requested a direct conversation with Charles. The king offered compromise, arguing that gradual change protected stability. To William, however, compromise started to feel like another way of postponing the same problem. Catherine later removed the briefing papers from her bag and placed them unopened inside a drawer. "Leave it," she said quietly. William looked at her and answered only, "I can't." From that moment, polite objections no longer seemed enough. Weeks of restraint were narrowing toward a confrontation, and when William finally faced Camilla directly, neither side was willing to pretend the argument was still only about ceremony. There were no cameras, no audience, and no ceremony left to soften what came next. William and Camilla faced each other with years of complicated family history pressing into a dispute that had begun with protocol and become painfully personal. She believed he had diminished the present queen to elevate Catherine. He believed quiet sacrifice had been mistaken for weakness for far too long. This time, neither intended to retreat. Charles allowed the private conversation because he still hoped honesty might stop the fracture from becoming permanent. The king stayed outside the exchange, but his decision carried enormous weight because only the sovereign could ultimately approve major changes affecting royal duties. William's claim that the crown belonged to Catherine was not about legal ownership. Inside this conflict, it meant something symbolic: who represented sacrifice, trust, continuity, and the future in the public imagination. Camilla gripped the back of a chair and told William plainly that he had humiliated her during her own husband's reign. The queen consort reminded him that decades of hostility, criticism, and public suspicion had not made her role temporary. She had fought for acceptance, stood beside Charles through difficult years, and believed she had earned the right not to be treated as though her place were merely being held until someone more popular arrived. William refused to accept that interpretation. The prince told her Catherine had never asked to replace anyone, and that was exactly the point. His anger came from watching his wife repeatedly stay silent while decisions affecting her future were made in the name of balance. He believed restraint had been read as permission. Catherine's refusal to complain, he said, did not mean she should always be the person expected to surrender ground. Camilla's voice sharpened when she asked whether William was trying to begin the next reign before Charles's had even finished. She accused him of turning preparation into pressure and succession into a shadow hanging over the current monarchy. William rejected the charge immediately. The future king insisted that respecting the present did not require pretending the future did not exist, especially when decisions made now could shape responsibilities for years. Camilla pushed harder. She said Catherine should have spoken for herself if she felt wronged. William answered that Catherine's refusal to turn family tension into personal warfare was precisely why he had stepped forward. Silence fell between them. Camilla finally released the chair. So this was never about one ceremony. William did not hesitate. No, it wasn't. The door opened soon afterward, but nothing had been repaired. Charles understood that immediately. The argument had exposed the emotional divide, yet emotion alone could not determine royal power. What happened next would depend on decisions only the king could authorize, and those decisions would reveal whose concerns he was truly prepared to protect. For all the emotion surrounding William's declaration, one truth remained immovable: Charles was still king. The arguments could deepen, advisors could negotiate, and the future heir could speak with extraordinary force, but the present reign still carried his signature. That made the next hours brutally personal. Defending Camilla too aggressively risked widening the divide with his son. Giving William too much could look like abandoning the woman who had stood beside him for decades. Charles understood the balance of power better than anyone around him. The king controlled the direction of the current reign, while William's influence came from being the future monarch and leading a household whose importance was steadily increasing. Senior aides placed a compromise before him: preserve Camilla's present dignity while formally accelerating several responsibilities for William and Catherine. A royal household, in simple terms, is the team and structure supporting a senior royal's public duties. The proposal was designed to prevent any obvious winner or loser. Charles sat with the papers long after the discussion ended. He remembered Camilla asking whether he agreed with his son, and the question now felt heavier, because whatever he signed would become his real answer. The monarch had spent years trying to hold private loyalty and public duty together. Now those two instincts were pulling in opposite directions. William met his father privately before the decision was made. The prince told him he was not asking for Camilla to be humiliated or stripped of respect. He wanted Catherine's future position treated as inevitable, rather than something repeatedly reopened for negotiation. Charles listened carefully. The determination in his son reminded him of his own younger frustrations with an institution that could move painfully slowly, even when change seemed unavoidable. Charles finally made his choice. Catherine would receive a broader role in major forthcoming engagements and be included more directly in future planning discussions. It fell short of everything William had pushed for, but the direction was unmistakable. The future king had forced movement. Charles added one condition before the agreement could stand. William had to stop using language that made the crown sound divided between competing women. The king warned that symbolism could become dangerous when the public began interpreting family tension as institutional warfare. William agreed to protect stability, but when asked whether he would withdraw what he had said about Catherine, he refused. Charles lifted his pen over the final page and paused. Then he asked the advisor opposite him to leave. Once the door closed, the monarch signed alone. By evening, the administrative question had been settled. Yet the signature answered Camilla's earlier question in a way words never had. And when she learned what had changed, the personal fallout began almost immediately. Victory inside a royal family rarely feels like victory. Catherine received the recognition William had fought for, yet no celebration followed. Camilla retained her position, but she could no longer ignore the direction in which influence was moving. Charles had preserved institutional balance while damaging something far more delicate at home. And William, having crossed a line he could never fully uncross, discovered that protecting someone could still leave them carrying the consequences. Catherine was formally told that her role in future ceremonial planning and high-level engagements would expand. The change was presented as orderly evolution, not punishment for Camilla. High-level engagements are major public or state duties reserved for senior working royals, so greater involvement meant more visible trust and responsibility. Yet William's declaration now shaped how everyone interpreted the decision. What might once have looked administrative suddenly felt connected to the identity of the next reign. Catherine thanked William for defending her, but her gratitude came with unease. The princess told him she hated knowing another woman's pain had become attached to her advancement. She had never wanted Camilla diminished so that she could rise. William reminded her that the conflict had begun because her restraint kept being treated as acceptance, but he could hear the discomfort in her voice. His victory had secured movement. It had not secured peace. Camilla received the finalized arrangement alone. The queen consort read the first page twice, set it down, and remained seated when an aide quietly asked whether she wanted anything challenged. No, she answered. The single word carried more exhaustion than surrender. She still held her place beside Charles, but the paperwork confirmed something she had feared throughout the confrontation. The institution was already preparing more openly for those who would come after them. Charles went to her later and did not pretend the decision had been painless. The king admitted he could not freeze the monarchy in place simply to protect everyone from difficult feelings. Camilla understood the logic immediately. Then she told him logic was not what had wounded her. What hurt was realizing that William's intervention had forced movement Charles had previously resisted. Catherine responded in a very different way. She personally removed celebratory language from a draft briefing about her expanded responsibilities and wrote beside one phrase, "No comparisons." When William saw the alteration, the prince finally understood the contrast between them. He had fought by drawing a line. She intended to carry the result by refusing to deepen it. That quiet instruction eventually reached Camilla. For the first time, the queen did not hear Catherine's name as part of an attack. She heard restraint. And that small gesture opened a door no signed agreement could force. Because the next real change would come when Catherine and Camilla finally found themselves alone. After days of arguments carried through husbands, heirs, advisors, and palace rooms, the two women at the center of the conflict finally met without anyone standing between them. Catherine had never asked William to elevate her above Camilla. Camilla had never expected decades of struggle to leave her feeling temporary. Now, without anyone interpreting their motives for them, both women faced something simpler and far harder: each other. Catherine requested the meeting because she refused to let William's declaration become the final word between them. The princess knew the institutional shift could not simply be undone, But she also understood that changing responsibilities did not have to destroy their ability to coexist. Ceremonial arrangements are the planned roles senior royals perform during major state and public occasions, and those arrangements now reflected Catherine's growing importance. The question was whether personal resentment would grow beside them. Catherine spoke first. She told Camilla she had never wanted advancement at her expense, and admitted that William's statement had overwhelmed her. Years of quiet service had suddenly been turned into a declaration she had never chosen. She respected why her husband had defended her, but she did not want that defense remembered as an attack on another woman. Camilla listened before answering with an honesty that changed the tone. The Queen Consort said the sentence had hurt because much of her adult life had been shaped by people insisting she did not belong. She had survived years of hostility only to hear a future king seemingly identify someone else as the woman who represented the crown more truly. Catherine understood then that the argument had touched an older wound, one deeper than ceremony. Catherine revealed what she had already told her own household. No comparisons, no language suggesting replacement, and no attempt to present the new arrangement as a public victory. The princess explained that she would not allow her future role to be built by humiliating Camilla. That was not the kind of monarchy she wanted to help shape. Camilla's resistance softened, though she did not surrender her own position. She made clear that she would never apologize for defending the place she had fought to earn. Catherine did not apologize for accepting the responsibilities now coming toward her. Yet both women recognized how much of their conflict had been magnified by others defining what each of them supposedly represented. Catherine rose to leave, without expecting reconciliation. Camilla stopped her before the meeting ended, and said quietly that she would not oppose the revised ceremonial arrangement. The princess turned back, nodded once, and thanked her. There was no embrace, and no sudden friendship. But something had shifted. And just as the private conflict began to cool, William's words escaped the palace, forcing the country outside those walls to decide what his extraordinary declaration really meant. Once William's statement reached the outside world, a private family confrontation became something far larger. The country began arguing over monarchy, marriage, succession, loyalty, and the women expected to carry the crown's emotional weight. Some heard devotion, a husband refusing to let his wife be diminished. Others heard a warning from a future king, already defining the character of the reign that would one day follow Charles. William watched the coverage intensify as commentators returned again and again to the phrase, "the only woman this crown truly belongs to." Some treated it as romantic loyalty. Others interpreted it as institutional symbolism, meaning a statement about who best represents the values and public image of monarchy. Palace communications, the official system used to manage royal statements and media responses, refused to expand on the private dispute. That silence allowed the sentence itself to dominate everything. William quickly understood the danger. The prince feared Catherine had become trapped inside an image of ambition that completely contradicted her actual behavior. She had spent days trying to reduce tension, yet now headlines made her sound like the victor of a battle she never wanted. Catherine told him, retracting his support would only create another spectacle. She would rather let her conduct answer the noise than begin another public argument. Camilla faced a different kind of pressure. The Queen Consort watched commentators compare her long, difficult journey with Catherine's popularity and future role. Personal attacks began appearing alongside endless predictions about succession. Yet instead of ordering a counteroffensive, she told her team not to answer insults or encourage comparisons. In that decision, she unexpectedly echoed the very restraint Catherine had shown toward her. Then came the moment nobody inside the palace could control. During an unrelated royal appearance near Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered as William and Catherine arrived together. Applause rose around them with unusual force. The princess briefly lowered her eyes, while he placed a steadying hand near her back. Nothing was said, yet the reaction turned a private declaration into something the public now believed it understood. Catherine confronted the next wave the following morning. A fictional newspaper front page carried 4 enormous words: William chooses his queen. Palace aides immediately recognize the danger. The headline transformed a husband's defense into a symbolic preview of the next reign, making the dispute appear far more absolute than the private compromise had ever been. Catherine studied the page beside her breakfast, folded it in half until the headline disappeared, and continued discussing the day's engagements. William noticed. So did those around them. The newspapers had chosen their verdict, but the family still needed one of its own, and what Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine did, after the noise faded, would reveal whether the crown had been divided, or finally forced to define its future. In the end, William's declaration did not remove a queen, crown a princess early, or rewrite the constitutional order. Its real power was far more human. He had drawn a line around the woman who would one day stand beside him, and declared that her years of restraint would no longer be mistaken for weakness. Yet the deeper meaning came afterward, when Catherine refused to turn his defense into conquest and forced everyone involved to separate love from rivalry. Charles remained king, and Camilla remained secure beside him. The crisis ended without anyone being stripped of an established position or publicly humiliated. The constitutional order, the legal structure that determines who holds sovereign authority and how succession works, had never changed. What changed was the understanding of the future. Catherine now had a clearer path toward greater responsibility, while William had made it impossible for uncertainty around her role to continue indefinitely. William spoke to Catherine privately before their next formal appearance. The prince admitted he did not regret defending her, but he did regret how heavily his words had fallen on her shoulders. He knew his declaration had made her more exposed at the very moment he had been trying to protect her. Catherine accepted the apology quietly. She did not ask him to withdraw the sentiment behind what he had said, because she understood that his intention had never been to make her victorious over another woman. Charles arrived at the next family gathering beside Camilla, determined to restore a sense of normality without pretending the wounds had vanished. The king understood that stability did not require everyone to forget what had happened. When Catherine entered, the queen did not turn away. She acknowledged her calmly, and Catherine returned the gesture. The exchange was small, but after everything that had happened, it carried weight. Hurt remained. Open warfare did not. William's statement finally revealed what it had truly been about. The future king had not been claiming that the crown literally belonged to Catherine. He had been defining the monarchy he intended to build, one in which his partnership with her would not be decorative, temporary, or endlessly negotiable. And Catherine's response gave those words their final meaning. She refused revenge, comparison, and humiliation, proving through restraint exactly why he had been willing to risk so much defending her. Before they stepped forward again, William reached for Catherine's hand in private. She squeezed it once, released it, and moved beside him, not behind him, not ahead of him, but beside him. Charles had preserved the present. Camilla had kept her dignity. William had declared the principles of his future. And Catherine had emerged not as a woman who seized the crown, but as one whose restraint convinced the future king she could carry its weight. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.